Greetings, everyone. This is Mike Riley, the voice of Ironman. And this is the Old School Tri Show with my Kiwi mates Cameron Harper and Brian Ashby. The show that talks about all things triathlon, old and new. We're powered by Ansco Foods, bringing you nutrition and good health from New Zealand's beef and lamb. Thanks for listening, everyone. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome along to the Old School Tri Show, brought to you by our great friends at Ansco Foods. And today, Brian, we always enjoy walking down memory lane, but goodness me, this is a whole nother level today, isn't it?
Oh, it certainly is. Look, by sheer definition, as everyone knows, anyone who starts an Ironman is extremely driven. And I guess most Ironman people are really high achievers in other areas of their lives too. And to that end, this two-time winner from the early days totally fits that description. Next up on the Old School Tri Show, Ray Browning.
Ansco Foods is proud to be the new naming partner of Ironman New Zealand, ensuring every stroke, pedal and stride is powered by the best nature has to offer. Ansco Foods is on a mission to bring nutrition and good health from New Zealand's finest beef and lamb. Ansco Foods, putting the iron in Ironman with New Zealand's finest beef and lamb. Visit anscofoods.com/Ironman to find out more.
Well, sometimes we have to look sort of long and hard and do a little bit of digging to find some of our winners from the past. But what a thrill it is for us to link up today with Ray Browning. And Ray, what part of the US are you living in these days?
I live in Portland, Oregon.
Right.
West Coast, left side.
Right, and that was sort of traditionally where you sort of came from. That was where you grew up.
No, I was a Colorado kid, so
okay.
Intermountain West. Yeah, we came out here in 2015, so I've been here about almost 10 years. But no, I wasn't a coastal person. I was more of a mountain kid.
Right. Well, let's wind the clock back to way back when, and we're hauling it right in now, and. When you sort of arrived at Ironman New Zealand, you'd already kind of done an Ironman. You'd done the biggie, you'd done Kona, but prior to that, your sporting background, and I'm guessing this was through sort of high school and so on, was in cycling, and you were really sort of achieving in that sport.
Well, yeah, I'll start by saying the football that I'm going to speak about is American football, more closely related to rugby than European football. But in high school, I grew up in a small mountain town, and my dream was to play college football, American football, which requires you to be big and strong, of which I was neither. But that was not enough of a deterrent to prevent me from my first couple of years in college really trying to get big and strong to play college football. And I was 5'10" or so and weighed over 200 pounds. So almost, 90 kilos. But I, through a number of sort of funny events, I'd always loved riding a bicycle all my life. And I realized that my pursuit of college football wasn't going to work out. I wasn't ever going to play. And I was actually cardiovascularly not very fit. So I switched. I had to ride to a party once, which is typical in college, on my bicycle. And it was up in a reservoir up above the town where I was living for college. And I barely made it. And it pissed me off. It made me really angry that I was. So I just started riding my bike and ended up, becoming I would call myself a, second tier kind of national caliber bike rider. It was mostly support roles. I was helping other people win races, which I wasn't quite sure I was, I was like, I have to do what? And then that was the segue to the sport of triathlon. I went to graduate school at UCLA and at that time transitioned from cycling to the sport of triathlon in like 1986.
So you like at that time, US cycling, we had Greg LeMond was sort of making waves.
Yeah, I know Greg.
Was that a sort of a driver for you? Were you inspired by
No, not really. I didn't. I mean, I was kind of the course. We had an event in the U.S. at the time, a multi-day stage race called the Coors Classic, which was kind of it was a premier sort of cycling event in North America at the time, and it went actually through the towns I grew up in Aspen and Vale and all these different places. And so I knew kind of that cast of characters who participated at those events. I was never really that good. I probably could have ridden in that race as a domestique, but ironically enough, I got to be much better friends with the cycling world after I got more involved in triathlon. Davis Finney is a long time friend of mine, who was elite cyclist, Ron Kiefold, Greg, bunch of other folks from that era. It wasn't, I mean, I don't know. I think I just was a college kid who needed something to do, and I knew how to ride a bike, and I liked riding a bicycle, so I just kept riding it and started riding faster and faster, and then figured out I might as well try to race. I don't know. It wasn't because I had seen some movie or anything like that. But yeah.
Are you naturally a competitive guy, Ray? Like to go. I mean, I'll be honest. I'm picking you up. You're a competitive dude, man. I get that. But is that what was it the competition? I mean, that's the cool thing about bike riding is it is really the elite of competition.
That's a really interesting question. I don't. That I have the most competition that I have is internal, not external. And so, if I think I should be able to ride at a certain speed, it'll really, I'll get frustrated if I can't ride at that speed for that length of time. And so it was less about beating other people than it was about constantly just getting better, and slowly you start to see, well, gosh, I used to get beat regularly by these people, and now I'm not getting beaten regularly by these people. Occasionally I'm winning. So although I will say that does mean I'm competitive. I don't, but I in most of my racing career, it always felt great to win, but it wasn't necessarily the I don't know, the primary objective. It was to go as fast as I could. And if that got first, great. If that didn't get first, then that was going to be what it was going to be.
And I think we're going to arrive at a spot where what you've just described kind of works for you in terms of developing technology and so on later on in your triathlon career. And I suspect we'll get to that point. You mentioned like you're a 95 kg footballer, so you're getting into that. So how much weight did you kind of strip off? When you found the love of the bike.
About 20. Hey Shannon, can you turn that other light on? Yeah, thank you. I'm kind of dark as it is. 25 kilos.
Oh wow!
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, a lot. I got down to, I think 60, 70, 70 kilos, probably 75 was about ideal, down from 90, 95. So almost 20 kilos. Yeah. But the one thing that I think really benefited me, I was just super strong. Like I had just gotten very, very strong. And that I think really helped. Like I didn't get beat up. Like it was rare. Not until 10 years on did I ever have any problem with injuries. Never had problems with injuries, except for like if I fell off a bike or, did something silly like that. But, so I found that, I was, faster when I got a little bit lighter. And that's true in cycling. I mean, you see the guys that are winning the major races, they're way lighter than that. Watts per kilogram.
Yeah. Were you living, like you mentioned, Colorado? I mean, everyone, it's a mecca, Boulder and people going train. Were you living at altitude and things there? Or
Yep, I lived outside of Boulder in a place on Magnolia Road, which has become very, very famous for the elite running community. Some of the best distance runners use that road as a training road. It's a dirt road. It's at about 8,000 feet, so 2,500 meters. And then, it's 20 minutes to Boulder. So while most of my racing, not most, half of my racing I did based out of there. Boulder was, at that time, though, it's 1990, 1991. It wasn't really the Mecca that it became. I mean, that kind of came a little bit later, where it became kind of a who's who of triathlon for the summer in particular. I stayed all winter. I didn't ever leave, but
yeah. So 1986, how did this come about? You decide that the world's kind of a little bit different. You just enter Kona, Hawaii, the world champs on a whim, and you rock in there and you turn up, and I don't think you're overly impressed with your performance, but 16th, my God.
Well, so two things I will say. 16 out of, you don't have to fill in the rest, but there weren't that many people racing. So
there's plenty. Don't be modest.
But the other thing I will say so how I got into it is it's actually, I think it was the fourth maybe triathlon that I had ever done. I did one in Lake Placid, which happened to be an Ironman qualifier. And I really didn't know much about like multi-sport. I didn't, it wasn't like I had come in and, I want to do this. It just happened to be that the people that I was training with that was their focus, to do this Ironman race. And I just kind of was like, well, I grew up swimming. So swimming came back really easily, and I was a good bike rider, so that part wasn't very hard. Running was a bit of a challenge for sure. But there was still a qualifier. I went to Lake Placid, which I managed to get. I was a graduate student. I had no money. I had some frequent flyer miles, so I managed to poach a ride to this place and had a friend who lived near there, and that was the qualifier. And I figured, well, if I could swim okay and ride okay, it was a really hilly, hard bike ride that I would probably manage to do all right in the race. But it wasn't necessarily like I was going to qualify for Hawaii. It was more, my friend asked me to come. He said, "You think you really like this race? It'd be great to see you. Can you come out and do it?" And I did. And it turned out to be, I did well enough to qualify. And I remember it was July. And of course the race was in October. And that was the longest run I'd ever done in my life, was at that race. It was a half Ironman race. Yeah. And I was like, geez, I got a little bit of work to do. I got to double that. And, the bike part wasn't like, that didn't necessarily faze me that much, but the run felt like that was going to be a stretch. And it was quite a stretch.
So at what point, Ray, did you look at, you'd done a couple of smaller triathlons, do you think to yourself, hey, Ironman looks like a good idea? What made you think to yourself, you know what, I'm going to go long and do Ironman?
Gosh, I didn't give it that much thought. It was really, it was more of the people that I was training with, I was really enjoying. And in 1986, there was a real animosity between bike riders and triathletes. Triathletes wore these stupidly bright colors. They didn't know how to ride bicycles. There was a lot wrong with triathletes from our perspective, from the cycling perspective. But I was hanging out with these guys at UCLA, and I was really enjoying it. It was just really, really good friends. And so the going there in 86 was as much about that, and just, the idea of, well, I've always enjoyed a challenge, I didn't know. And I was at the time I was in graduate school at UCLA, and I had an engineering background, so I didn't have a lot of human physiology background. And the department I was in that was all I was learning, was neurology and physiology and some biomechanics, which is what I sort of focused on. But so I'm like a kid in a candy store, because I'm taking exercise phys, and I'm taking, these nutrition classes, and I'm I'm going, wow, okay, there's people who've really thought about how to prepare for endurance athletics. Dave Costel was a big name back then, who to me is really one of the godfathers of exercise physiology. And so I was able to take classroom learning, and I built my own training plans based on the learning, and I was experimenting and I was trying different things. So it was less about, like accomplishing this Ironman thing than I was getting to train really hard, which I liked doing. I was learning every single day something new, and I was hanging out with people I liked. And so when the opportunity to qualify for Hawaii, and then I had to figure out how I was going to get over there, and pay for it. Then and I had. There's always a beauty in not having expectations, right? When you just don't have any expectations about how well or if you're going to be able to even do this thing, that you set out to do. And so when I first went in '86, I kept passing people on the bike, and I thought, this is actually pretty cool. I mean, this is, I feel pretty good. And I don't know, I might have got off the bike. I don't know if I was in the top 10, but it was pretty close. And then I thought, all right, well, that was good. Now the entire event is going to go past me over the next however long it takes me to run 26 miles, and I'm running along thinking, here, I know they're going to come by any minute now, and I kept running, and a few people passed me, over the course. And I was like, God, it's not, I mean, I'm not getting past very much. So, that was '86. It was, it was wonderful. It was just wonderful. I mean, it was a great event. It was so educational. It was, I mean, it was difficult for sure, but not, not. I mean, I was ecstatic. I was like, wow, that was actually super cool.
And I love what you described. Effectively, you described yourself as your own human lab rat, really.
Oh my gosh, absolutely, yeah. Well, and that's what led to working with Dan Emfield at Quintana Roo, and a lot of the research we were doing. I was, always really, really fascinated on the intersection of technology and performance. Whether that was, I was experimenting with nutritional companies. There was so much we didn't know at that time.
Yeah.
That every experience you had was, like, all right, I wonder if that'll work. And most of it was a terrible failure. I mean, I remember, nutrition products exploding on bicycles because they would become fermented, and I mean, all kinds of stuff that, now it's kind of figured out, like, what works in 100-degree weather, but not then.
Yeah.
What so about, it was very, and I think that's the thing, like, people now like talk about, retiring from the sport, and they have a career and then it ends. And, at least for me, I didn't really do it as a career. So it didn't feel right to like retire from something that I never thought would ever be a job in the first place. It's kind of like, well, I'll just stop. Yeah.
With some of the technological things you're talking about, Ray, and you mentioned Quintana Roo and some of these other places as technological advances. I mean, what was that like, being able to talk to people like that, especially with your cycling background? Did you look at some of these tri bikes and go, you know what, we can do much better than this? And what was sort of some of the things that you looked at in that regard?
Yeah, well, one of the things that was happening, several things. The focus in cycling was really shifting, partly because of triathlon, and also partly because that was the time that Greg LeMond won the Tour de France in the last time trial over Laurent Fignon, and it kind of highlighted the importance of aerodynamics in cycling, which had always been a little bit downplayed, partly because of the rules of UCI. So, I was working with Steve Head on aerodynamic wheels. Steve was still one of my favorite people on earth, he and his wife, Annie. Because, aerodynamics all of a sudden mattered. So then you start looking at positions, and all right, well, if you're trying to have a flat torso to be more aerodynamic, it's really difficult to accomplish that with a 72-degree C-tube angle, right? So, Dan Emfield and I were talking, well, gosh, if you push the C-tube angle up to 77, 78, 80 degrees, can you still handle the bike well, and what does it do to aerodynamics? It kind of shifts your whole profile up and forward. And I was in a lab at UCLA where we could test a lot of the effects of those things, both from a physiological perspective as well as power output. So, and then, of course, Dan was also, I was a huge advocate of his efforts in swimming focused wetsuits. I mean, and prior to that, there was no swimming focused wetsuit. You used a surfing wetsuit, right? Which, so it was all of this stuff that had to be made that didn't, that was right at the time when the Look pedals, we did a project where we're looking at the float in the pedals, because that was the first time, right before this pre-speed play, clipless pedals were a relatively new invention. So, everybody was experimenting with what that flexibility, would you lose power output? What would happen? So, and for me, it was such a rich environment for all of those reasons. There was the training, there was the product evolution, there was the racing, there was the friends. It was very, very multi-dimensional. At least for me, I found it to be incredibly exciting.
Yeah. So you were this poor student struggling along. And you've been to Hawaii and you go, I want to go to New Zealand and do this race. How did that come about?
So it's actually just about right. I did Hawaii and I was like, gosh, that was actually pretty cool. And I'm, maybe I could, I don't know. I wonder if I could do better if I, because I felt like I had 2 months to prepare for Hawaii from, this like Placid event. And I thought, well, gosh, are there more of these? And then I kind of learned, that there was this race coming up in New Zealand, a place that always was high on my list to go visit. And I looked at the calendar. I was living in LA, so I didn't have winter. I didn't have to worry about winter. I could train all winter long. So I, just decided to go. And then I had to figure out how to pay for it. So I managed to find this is great in the era of sponsorship, a Swedish tool company. They made like screwdrivers.
As you do.
And it was like a friend of a friend who knew like the president. And I remember just calling them up, Swedish accent, hello Ray, how are you? Good. I need like $1,500. Oh, what for? I was like, I'd like to do this race in New Zealand. It's kind of it's a big race. It's called an Ironman race, and I'll wear your Lindstrom Tools is who it was. And I said, I'll be happy to promote your product. And out of generosity, that's how I got a plane ticket. And then I knew a friend of a friend who I stayed on her sofa, slept on her couch. Showed up there with, my stuff and, and then I remember I finished and this Ruth, who is still a close friend. I just saw her at the track and field world championships last year, as a matter of fact. Ruth is at the finish line, and I ended up winning the race, which surprised the hell out of me. And she's like, well, you could have told me you were good. Didn't know.
Was it like coming? Yeah. But like coming to New Zealand? I mean, it's you're living in LA and you're winding the clock back. New Zealand's a wee bit different now, but certainly Auckland then, compared with what you'd been living in and all those things, coming to New Zealand, I would have felt like a sleepy backwater. I'm guessing.
Oh God, not for me. I just was, I was enamored with the country before I got there, and it got even more enamored every time I went. I just loved going there. In fact, my wife and I honeymooned there for a month, all through the South Island, stayed with Scott and Aaron, and there was just a really good energy. I wasn't a big city person, so LA wasn't like a place that I didn't go to LA because of the city. I went because of this person that I wanted to work with at UCLA. So the vibe of it was beautiful. The water, the people, the climate. over the years, I got to explore almost all of the North and South Islands, through, so, and, it was, I was, it was a little bit of a dream come true, right? I was 25, 26 years old. I hadn't done a lot. I didn't, our family didn't travel. I wasn't in a well-to-do family where we'd take, our vacations were in a station wagon. They weren't, we weren't on an airplane.
Yeah.
And so, it's like, wow, this is actually super cool. I'm getting to take my bike and go to a different country. And so it was all very, young and naive. It felt like, just kind of, so, yeah.
Just before, sorry, Brian, before we get on to the race, we'll go to it's something I wonder about. What did the screwdriver sponsor say about the win?
They said it was fine. It was great. They didn't see a single, like I think I had one press clipping that I brought back, that literally I had to actually bring it back. Cause there was no way to, there was no digital media or anything. I had to clip out the piece of paper from the, from the newspaper and bring it back to them. And here's my finished photo. And they were, it was a favor, the CEO of the company, they didn't care, but they were surprised. They were like, you won, like the whole thing? I was like, yeah, pretty much the whole thing. And I loved that 2 mile, 100-mile, 20-mile format was, I was sad when they got rid of that for the non-Ironman, non-Kona races. I still think to this day that would have been a better, for people who wanted to do those races and then culminate in Hawaii. It would have, I specialized in longer races in my career, and that would have made Hawaii a better event because you weren't quite there's a lot of difference in a, 6.5 hour race than an 8.5 hour race.
Yeah.
In terms of recovery and everything else. But
aside from winning it, and the third version of Ironman New Zealand at that stage, what do you recall from that day and the race itself? I know sort of Rick Wells, the Kiwi, sort of set the early pace in the swim.
He did. The guy was an awesome swimmer, and he was, if I recall, he was ahead for quite a while on the bike. I remember the run. It's always where the anxiety was for me, because I was like, well, all right, I got off the bike and I think I might have been in the lead, but it was like a T. You kind of ran out one way, 5 miles, and then came back and then went down St. Heliers, down to downtown and then back again. And so you got a chance to see people, and there were a couple little sort of ins and outs, both directions. So you kind of could gauge where you were relative to other people. And I remember on the last 10 miles down along the waterfront, it was good because you could turn around and then you could run a stopwatch and see like, okay, well, I've gone a minute and there's the second place guy, so I'm 2 minutes ahead. And so I remember seeing where other people were, and I kept thinking, all right, well, they'll probably catch me, because I just didn't think of myself as a decent runner. And they all looked better than I did, than I felt like I did. It's like you're running and you're like, oh, that guy looks good. Jeez. Super fast. And I remember there was at that time, it was actually, I have so many fond memories. There were probably 30 people on bicycles just riding along with me. And they were, come on, Ray. Good on you, Ray. Way to go, Ray. I had no idea who these people were. But I was just like surrounded in this group of people. And then at one point, about 1K from the finish line, somebody that was in Mission Bay, maybe we're kind of in Mission right before St. Heliers. That's coming out of Mission Bay and about to, kind of do that long stretch to St. Heliers. And I remember looking at somebody and I go, where's the next guy? And he's like, dude, he's way back there. He goes, you're going to win. And I remember just thinking, really? Oh my, nobody is going to catch up. That was kind of the prevailing sentiment, was more of a, wow. Later it became, a little more, later in racing, it became a little more, not as much of a surprise, but that year, I mean, it was a complete surprise.
So you were talking earlier about expectation, Ray, in your early years. Was it the same turning up here to New Zealand? You got yourself your ticket down here. You were like, you know what, I'm just going to see what happens, or what was your expectation of the day?
I'll fast forward a little bit, but I'll start by saying that I always had, based on I like the analytics of performance, and I kind of knew what I had access to every conceivable piece of equipment. I could measure oxygen consumption, I could measure power output, I could measure economy, I could measure whatever I wanted to measure at UCLA, and I used those tools to have a pretty good sense of what I was able to be able to do. In 1987, I wasn't quite so specific, but I would always add up like how fast I would think I would do each section. How long is the swim going to take? Is it going to take 40 minutes, 42 minutes? It's 100 miles on the bike. That should take me a little, maybe 4 hours, depending on the hills. And so I had a target time, like how fast I thought I could do the event. And I'll tell you a funny story. In '89, the second time I won, I had that down pretty well. I had it dialed in, and I remember the course record being, I don't know, 88 course record, 8 hours and 44 minutes or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but somebody came up to me in 1989 before the race and said, "Hey, we're doing this thing where if you put in like $5, and whoever comes closest to predicting their time gets the pot." And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds cool." And he's like, how fast are you going to go? And I go, "Well, I think it's going to be 8 hours, 35 minutes and maybe 20 seconds. And he's like, "Well, that's pretty specific." And I was like, "Yep, that's about right." And I did the race in 8 hours and 35 minutes. So I was 20 seconds off. And the guy comes up and I'd won. And he comes up and he's like, "Dude," he goes, "You won, but you don't really want the money, do you?" And I'm like, "What? Of course I do." And he was like, he thought because I had won, I wasn't gonna want the booty. And I was like, "No, I'll take it. It's like $300. It was great."
That's right.
So I did have I was very systematic, both in how I trained and then how I approached races, and so it wasn't even early on in '87. I had a pretty good idea of how fast I could go, and again, like my strategy was always, if that's fast enough to win, great. If it's not, that's okay.
What was it like going back to Hawaii on the back of that, Ray? I think you're 14th that year in '87, and suddenly you've built a bit of a reputation for yourself. You've won a race that Molina's won it previously. Four. Dave Scott's raced there, Tinley's raced there, and so on. Yeah.
I don't have Hawaii. I never enjoyed that race, like, ever. We did it however many times, 10 times. I think it sounds right. Yeah, 9 or 10. And I think I don't know, for a lot of reasons, it just wasn't. I really don't like racing in hot, humid conditions. Like, I just never have. That's why I always, like, my fastest race I ever did was in Europe in '92, and that was Berlin, like 50 and pouring rain, and it was just fabulous. It was just like, because you didn't have to worry about any heat overload. I just, so that year I remember feeling disappointed. Like I had higher expectations. I didn't think 14th was where I thought I would end up. And that was a scenario that I think repeated itself most years in Hawaii. I don't think, best I ever did there was 6th, and it didn't ever feel like it was what I was capable of doing. But then I wasn't really willing to give up all the other races that I really enjoyed and did well in to just do Hawaii well. Just didn't. That wasn't in my. And I knew myself well enough to know that even if I had not done other Ironman races, or maybe one in a year, like Mark and Dave and other folks were doing, I'm not sure I would have been that much faster. I've done that much better in Hawaii. It wasn't really my bailiwick.
Yeah. So like, like you move into 88 and suddenly, well, you're winning races. There's new races springing up, and I think it wins in Japan and in Canada and so on. You're really building some reputation here, and you come back to New Zealand. You're really at the top of your game.
Yeah. Well, I guess so. It was. It's not really humility. It's just more. It was really fun. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was just like you push yourself super hard. I mean, I don't want to make it sound flippant. I mean, those races are they're I call them how well you can tolerate pretty significant discomfort for a long time. It's not pain, but it's just discomfort. And I always found that experience to be, I don't know, pretty cool, right? Like, okay, I can go a little farther. I can go a little faster. I can go a little faster. I can go a little farther. I can go, and that's kind of the mantra, just mile after mile. Can I keep going? Can I keep going? Can I keep going? And that experience, not can I beat so-and-so or not can I do this? It was always, I mean, it was, don't get me wrong. It's great to win races and it's great to have good competition, but, yeah, so the rise felt, I don't know, it just, I never planned to be like a superstar athlete. It was always something that would have been cool to be, and then I found myself in a situation where, it's kind of hard to explain. I just wasn't, I felt like I stayed very down to earth.
Yeah.
I was like, I love talking to other people, how their race went, what they were doing. Partly because I think when you do something like this and you never think it's going to be a job or a living, like the guys now, I mean, oh my God, it's so serious and so intense, and trying to make a living out of it is it's a profession. It was not a profession. And, there were 5 of us, 10 of us, who were carpet bagging our way around the world. Mark and Dave and those guys were making decent money, but I mean, the rest of us weren't. We were getting by, but so I marvel at the intensity now. It's just crazy.
But that attitude, Ray, must have helped you immensely to be able to process what was going on as you approach these races, going, you know what, I'm out there to do my best, and if my best's not good enough, well, so be it.
Yeah, I mean, as long as that's right, and as long as I felt like I did my best, and most cases, I was usually pretty good about that. There were occasional races that were terrible, and but for the most part, I don't know. I don't know how many times in that 10-year period where I would just pinch myself and going, really? Like, I'm in an airport, I'm about to go to France or Japan or someplace, and I'm bringing my bike and my stuff, and I'm going to go do a race. How cool is that? Yeah. And then you see the same usual suspects, and after the race, you're drinking beer and, being misbehaving and all the other things that you do. So I just have such fond memories of those experiences. And, the racing itself was a huge lesson in resilience. Yeah. I don't think without it, I probably would have given up on other things in life sooner, but that experience was like, you can do hard stuff. We can all do really hard stuff.
You mentioned before just in terms of the distances and how you would love to have seen Hawaii remain at the your 3.8, your 180, and a full marathon. Of course, New Zealand, you come back in 1988 and it changes to that format. And you had a wonderful scrap that day with Scott Tinley. Tell us about that day.
He never lets me live that day down. Yeah, I mean, it was. I probably was a little bit disappointed, but I was also. It was in some ways validation because when you go to a race in '87, and no offense to Rick, but there were none of the big four, none of the and people look at the results and they go, okay, well, sure, it's pretty fast, and you won the race. But when SD showed up in '88, it was like the race had arrived, right? It was like, okay, this is an Ironman winner who's now towing the line, and that felt like I wasn't really sure. It's like I had a lot of respect for Scott as an athlete, and I thought, well, I'm going to do the best I can, and we'll see how this plays out. And it turned out to be a fun, kind of a fun day. And I mean, Scott and I have been friends since 1987. I mean, and we still see each other and talk regularly. And so I looked at that event. I was all right. I didn't drop out. I didn't, get beat by 2 hours. I'm sort of, I'm okay at this. I can do all right. I got second. It's pretty good. I think I got second.
Yeah, you got second. Yeah.
And so that was, in a way, it was validation. It was validation, that I had arrived at a level that was close to the top of the sport, and which is
You're
good.
being a little bit modest here, Ray, because you put so much hurt on those guys on the bike, destroyed them, and for Tinley to win, the margin is nothing. The bloke turned himself inside out. I'm right, aren't I, Cameron?
And Scott had to run a 2:43 to catch you. I mean, that's incredibly fast on a very challenging course.
Yeah. And I wasn't sure he could do it. I'm not. I don't want to say I'm taking anything away from what I was able to do. It was more. I felt like, it helped. '88 helped me. I was now in the conversation.
Yeah.
Right, where people are saying, "Oh, hey, this guy won in '87, and he was really close in '88." It wasn't like there wasn't anybody there. It was talent, good field. And then '88 kind of tended to be, legitimizing from other Ironman races as well. I'd won, Canada that year and Japan that year, I think. And so it was sort of a coming out as being in that group, I never really thought of myself as belonging to that group, but I was at least competitive with that group of people, which felt good. That was, I was doing a lot of exercise, so it would be good to have it feel like it got you something.
I don't want to give Scott Tinley any more ammunition against you, Ray, in the next conversation you have. But do you remember whereabouts it was that he overtook you? Because the distance between the two of you can't have been much, because the time was only 26 seconds between first and second.
Yeah, it was. I think if I remember right, we were again on that long stretch of waterfront between, like it still ran along Mission Bay.
It goes Mission Bay through Coe and round to St. Heliers.
And it was probably only 2K from the finish. Yeah. Maybe, or less. And he just tapped me on the butt and he said, "Just stay back there." I was so out of gas. I was thinking, all right, what am I going to do? And then I realized I couldn't do any more than I was doing, which was, so it was close. It was, and we had a number of, our paths crossed a number of times in the years following that. There was generally, the banter got lighter. It was never like, ha ha, kicked your ass by anybody. It was always like, I remember in the last Ironman I did in '96, maybe, at ST and I were not far apart. We were running up. Pay and Save Hill, Pawnee Hill, there, or whatever it's called, and I was ahead of ST, and I just remember him yelling. He's like, "Raymond, wait for me," because we were gonna. And I was like, if I stop, I'm just gonna just sit down and not. I didn't really want to do the race, and so I was like, I'm not gonna stop. Just come catch me. So, yeah.
What was it like at the finish line at 88? You got that must have been quite electric, because people would have known, getting information from the course, how tight it was, and how you had biked earlier on, and people had seen what a great scrap it was, how it had unfolded.
Yeah, there was great energy. I mean, and it was, it was almost, I think, a kind of a continuous round of applause, right? Where people were cheering for ST, and then he comes in, and you kind of get this loud cheering, and then it kind of quieted down just a little bit. And then I was, it's not that long, right? In fact, the chute was probably 150 or 200 yards long when you turned off of the waterfront down into the park there. And so I think he had finished, and I had almost made the turn. So where all the crowd was, it was, people got a race. I mean, they for sure got to see a really good race. So it was fun. Yeah. Finishing races was always, I don't know. It was extremely satisfying.
Yeah. But you came back the next year, and your second win, and I just sort of doing a little bit of research here. Things were kind of starting to kick in terms of the technology that was things that you talked about earlier. But I think you were sort of like one of the real pioneers with the heart rate monitor, for example, and using that as a tool.
Yeah. I was very data driven. Would do things with specific intensities in mind. I planned out all of my training sessions. Usually I would do a year, the entire year. I would sit down in November and plot out the whole year's training. A little bit more of a kind of a high level, and then it would get more and more specific for each phase of the season. And I would use a whole suite of heart rate monitors. Was kind of the only tool we had back in that era. And I had become acquainted with heart rate monitors as an undergraduate in college. Through our university I attended had a strong veterinary program, and the heart rate monitors were initially designed for horses, for horse racing. And so a friend of mine who was in the vet school said, "Hey, there's this cool thing. This company in Finland's made this telemetered heart rate device that you can put on." And the watch was like, the size of a coffee cup. It was this giant thing, and it would give you the data. But yeah, I tried to be. I would say I was maybe not as successful and disciplined in the racing, at the actual race day, as I was in the the training for it.
Yes.
But let the competition dictate a little bit.
I mean, you guys were really pioneering, just in the sport alone, and in terms of the racing. But you've got all this analytical side and the whole cerebral side to the sport through your studies and all of those things. How was that sort of accepted within the community? Were other people sort of looking over the shoulder and saying, "Oh, this guy might be onto it," or were other people sort of a bit cynical and a bit sniffy about it? What was that like back in the day?
It's a good. I think everybody kind of had their own approaches. At least, well, at that time, I also started to be. So I worked with. I always loved educating and people. I grew up in a family of educators, and so as I started to gain some notoriety, I also got invited, like Dave Scott to do bike triathlon camps, and there were these other camps that were these programs that were offered to help up and coming athletes or just age group athletes who had a dream to improve their performance. And they many of them were as or more serious than I was about tracking. But at the elite level, we all kind of sort of kept to ourselves in regards to who was doing what and whether it was working or not. And so there wasn't as much kind of sharing at that time, I couldn't tell you what Mark, what his program was, other than the days that we would train together, which was generally not more than once or twice a week. You'd get the whole group together, and those sessions were usually just suffer fests. I mean, they were horrible, especially when Mark was known as being kind of he could be a little difficult. I used to play a trick on him. I only worked a couple times. He's pretty smart. Where in the early days of heart rate monitors, if your batteries, the amount of battery charge that you had in the monitor would really dictate how well it was going to broadcast to watches, the receivers. But Polar didn't have any. There was no technology to distinguish that wasn't linked between the band and the watch. So if we all had watches and I had the heart rate monitor on, you'd all see what my heart rate was. So what I would do with Mark is I would put in fresh batteries in my transmitter, and then I would ride as close to him as possible. And he was pretty serious about his heart rate. And my heart rate, I mean, he would be killing us, right? And so my job was to get up close to him so that his heart rate would go like, from 130 to 155, and he would slow down. and I would be like, thank God it worked. So there were a few tricks there that you pulled, but I think I was probably a little more systematic than a lot of other elites were, but I think it was also a time when there was just a lot of us trying to figure it out. Like, how do you manage these three sports together, and how do you periodize, and how do you mix hard days with hard days? Do you do hard, easy alternates? How do you, there was nothing. You couldn't look up any information other than what single sport athletes have been doing in their careers to give you a guidance. And so we were all experimenting. I think it was funny because we were pretty homogenous despite all the different ways we went about it. At the end of the day, we all finished pretty close to each other.
Yeah.
So I don't know that there was one method that worked better than the others.
On that 89 race, Ray, I don't know if you realize this, it was only through the research we're doing leading up to this, looking at all the times in Auckland from 1988 to 1998, that bike split of yours in 1989 was the fastest over that entire period. So you must have laid the smackdown on those dudes, man. 4:43 was your time, 4:43, and it's the fastest in that entire period.
That was a hard course. That was a really hard course. Very hilly, yeah, and punchy hills. Not like nice, 3%, 4%, but just I just remember feeling like you were going. But that was a style of course that I kind of liked, because I could just get out of the saddle and just, aerodynamics played less of a role, because when you're climbing up those short punchy climbs, you're not going that fast. So it's pure power output, but I came into that race feeling very, very well prepared. And so that was the same year that I had predicted the finish time, of 8:35. And it was so funny because I had forgotten I had made that bet. That was, I think I had thought my time on the bike was going to be at 4:42, maybe.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit slower than what I thought I would ride. Yeah. And I knew the course pretty well, but I figured, I just did a pretty basic, look at the course profile and what do I think my average speed's going to be and how long will it take to cover the distance.
What about the New Zealand roads? Do you have any memories of our roads, or were the US roads kind of the same? We got that big coarse gravel chip that rattles.
Oh man, that stuff's horrible. Yeah, it's like some of the roads were really bad. And then the other thing for me is just remembering to be on the right side of it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, thank God there were the motorcycles and the media entourages, because there certainly would have been times going through roundabouts I would have come out and just gone right straight into the wrong lane of traffic. But yeah, road surfaces weren't ideal, and it felt very. I remember the bike, feeling like there were parts when you felt like you were kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It's probably changed now, but I mean, it definitely felt somewhat remote in places. And it kind of beat you up.
Yeah. So you're really on top of things there. In 1989, you've got that amazing bike split and so on. What was the marathon like for you that day? I mean, you set a course record. It was just one of those days where just everything clicked.
Yeah. Everything went according to plan. I was able to, no flat tires, no weird weather, no headwinds out of nowhere. Just kind of pretty predictable. So, it's to me, the marathons were always, the most unpleasant of the three, experiences. So, but I remember that feeling, I felt like somebody was going to have to just run an unbelievable marathon to win.
Pull you in, yeah.
Like I was like, there's no way I'm going to lose this. I mean, there just isn't. Japan, that might have been that same year. I was in that similar situation, but I almost got beat because it was just awful. It was so hot and humid. But Japan's a whole nother story. But yeah, I mean, I remember it feeling, I'm on track. I got to the first turn, turn around, like when I thought I would be there, and I don't want to sound arrogant. It was just more, okay, I think I can run this fast, this far.
You knew where you were at,
yeah.
Use the words. You dropped a couple of words in there before. No punctures, and that kind of segues into 1990.
Isn't that when I got like a couple of flats or something?
You got a couple of flats. It's one of the saddest pictures. We got this book.
Yeah.
There's a very sad. I'll hold it up here to the camera. This is a very sad picture.
Right.
This is a sad picture.
I remember that, and I remember I had one spare, and then when I got the second flat, I was like, I don't know what to do because I didn't bring a patch kit. I mean, so that was that one wasn't very much fun.
No. But look, for all of that, I mean, it's one of the most famous races ever because of the remarkable finish with Ken Glar and Paulie Kura.
Oh yeah, Paulie.
Yeah. You look, somehow or other, you still managed to regather yourself and come in the top five, which says that's a lot of ticker to pull out. A lot of people would have just packed it in at that point.
Yeah. I was brought up not to quit.
Yeah.
I didn't quit very often.
I've got to say, it's one of the most competitive top fives that we've probably had. It was Kuru, Glar, Tinley, Molina, Browning. I mean, that's an incredible top five.
Yeah, it was a good field that year. Damn Finn. Paulie and I we had some really. He was a very funny guy, like in only the way a Finnish guy can be funny. I mean, he was hilarious. God, we drank too much vodka one night in Sweden together, and I don't think I've ever laughed so hard in my life as listening to him tell stories, because he was a celebrity in Finland. I mean, Michael Jordan-esque celebrity, right? Wow. He went to the royal palaces, and I was like, dude, what's that like? And he would just tell story after story. It was really fun. Yeah, great guy. I don't know what is he doing now. Does anybody know? I haven't followed up with him at all.
He's in the Finnish. He's a parliamentarian. He's in Finland's parliament. Yeah, he's a
Oh,
politician. Yeah,
good for him.
yeah,
That
yeah.
doesn't surprise me. Yeah, yeah, I could see that.
Well, which goes back to what we were sort of saying at the beginning, is that in this wonderful sport, by just sheer definition, people are high achievers, and that kind of underlines that. But that was your last time, I think, here in New Zealand racing, Ray. Just tell us about sort of the back end of your racing career and where your sort of focus turned after that.
Yeah, I raced until 96, but I had I think one of the most memorable races I had was in 1992. It's the first time I had gone over to race in Roth in Germany, and I had been training pretty much solo, but I had been I was feeling pretty convinced that a sub 8 hour event in that race was possible. I knew the course and the weather was really conducive, and it seemed like it was a fast course. So that's what I was trying to do. I call it probably my fondest memory of an event, because a lot of things went wrong. So I missed the start by not a lot, 15 or 20 seconds, but they were saying the cannon went off early, and they didn't. So people, and I knew it was early. I was like, and this is Germany. I'm like, things just don't happen early in Germany, And so I was like, 2 minutes before 7. And I was like, so I just waited. I'm just sitting there treading water. And then I realized, like, oh, they're not going to call anybody back. It's not going to be a false start. It's gone. Like, the race has started. So I'm like, I had to catch up. And then I got hit by a car on my bike, which I got a ticket for, by the way. I got a hit and run. Yep. Really? That was pretty fun. Afterwards, that was fabulous. It's a great story. Yeah. And, but I wasn't hurt. I got knocked off my bike, and got back on, and I was at 30K into the run, and I was at 7:59 pace. I was like, man, it was just great. And then at 31K, it was like somebody just opened up a trap door, and I fell in. I just went like almost ground to a stop. But I managed to get a little bit to eat, and I just was done. I was just completely cooked, and got second. Was 8 hours and 9 minutes, or 8 hours and 10 minutes, or something like that. But that race had so many characteristics to it. It really kind of remains one of my favorites, because I wanted to do something that I didn't quite get done, but I came close enough that it felt like it was worth trying to do. And had some less than ideal circumstances in the middle of it. So there was that race. And then, I also I guess it was right around 1991, I started to do a lot of cross-country skiing and speed skating and other winter sports. So I would just stop racing after Hawaii and immediately get on skis, and skied for a couple of factory teams in the U.S. Was the second American in the U.S. Birkebeiner ski race one year, won the Mountain Man Winter Triathlon World Championships one year. Really? So I pride myself a little bit, and I sort of took this really holistic approach to multisport, and then just applied it over an entire year. And so I only trained for summer sports, basically from March until October, and then did winter, from November to March. And now those experiences, learning how to cross country ski, that's my favorite sport. I mean, by far. I just love Nordic skiing. Not I don't watch it competitively, but doing it, like I participate, I go skiing as often as I can. Here in Portland, we're like an hour away from good skiing, so it's not bad.
Fantastic.
In the winter. Yeah. So, yeah, and I would say that those early years were, it's fun to talk to you guys because I have a lot of really fond memories of those experiences, but I don't often get asked or talk about them very often. I don't know why, it just kind of is,
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to sort of ask you that later on. It's we've sort of come out of nowhere and we've pulled you back into way back. But is it sort of people? And we've struck this with another couple that we've spoken to as well. I guess even locally here in New Zealand is it sort of something that I don't know. So many people that you associate with now just don't know this whole other life that you've had.
Yeah, I have to say I haven't been for a while. I felt like I put aside my athletic pursuits and then I focused my efforts more in doing a PhD and getting into academia, and it was very cerebral, and even though we did a lot of stuff around human movement, but I tended to downplay, my athletic career, partly because it really wasn't relevant, to as far as trying to achieve some success in an academic circle. Doesn't matter if you're a good athlete, right? So, which I think I regret sometimes. Recently over the last few years, I've been involved with a startup company, and it has I have come to learn the value of at least telling people, like, by the way, a long time ago I was doing these multi-sport events, these Ironman distance races, and that has a certain amount of impact on people. I mean, now people have heard about Ironman races, and there's something that it creates for them, like, oh, you have credibility that you didn't have before, which, so every now and then I will, people sometimes will find out, they'll dig and they'll find out that I had this background. And it's really not that I don't like talking about it. I enjoy it. I got so many good experiences, so many lessons learned. And it was really, really transformative for me. But yeah, so I always really appreciate seems like every 5 or 8 years, somebody reaches out and says, what have you been doing? We haven't been able to find, what you're up to. So, I think that's part of it is just that I didn't want to be known just as that, right? Yeah. I think a lot of, and I have to say, guys, I was always more amazed by not the elite athletes in Ironman races, but everybody else, because those stories that I would hear about, I mean, these fields had amazingly talented, accomplished individuals, from the fastest to the slowest, right? Everybody had this fantastic story. And I didn't feel like my story was it was just a different story, and okay, I have the time, and I'm young, and I have the energy, and I somehow have the genetics to be able to, go hard. And I do think that, those of us who do well in those kinds of events just are okay with suffering for a long time. It's just manageable. But yeah, I mean, I'd meet people when we do camps and stuff that were so unbelievably accomplished. I'd be like, okay, I'm feeling like that's pretty impressive. Heart surgeons or, whatever, politicians or whatever they've done, corporate executives, and you get talking to them about their job and what they do. And then they want to all talk about, the sport. I'm like, no. I want to hear more about, like, how did you do that? like, what was your company? What did it do? But yeah.
Did you when you gave up racing, Ray, and were you happy just to put a line through it and go, you know what, I'm moving on with my life now? Did you miss it initially, or do you miss it now?
No, I don't, and I didn't. It was, and I think partly, Cameron, it's because it felt like a gift. And I knew in 96 when I ran down Elite Drive, I didn't ever want to do a triathlon ever again as long as I lived. That may prove to be false, but I just was done. It didn't bring me the same joy or pleasure or satisfaction. I felt like, check, I've done this. I've done it at a really good level. I hope the sport continues to thrive. It deserves it. But I'm not going to be part of it. And I didn't miss it. I don't miss it. I like seeing, I don't really follow it. I follow it a little bit, but not a lot. I'm always eager to talk to people who tell me that they're involved in triathlon, and oftentimes it never even comes up that I had some past in triathlon. I'm just more interested in what they're trying to achieve and what they're excited about and where they're going to go. Cause now the races are everywhere. Right. I mean, but yeah, it felt like, in 96, just running down Elite Drive, I was super, super clear. Like, this is the last time I'm going to do this. And it was fine. It was absolutely fine.
It's interesting, Ray, that you talk, winding back to what we kind of started the conversation. You're a student, but you kept working hard and you kept studying all the way through, and really achieved within academia, and what I guess the way you approach the sport and the things that you learned, the technology and so on. Your company now, just tell us a bit about your company. You're CEO and founder of Biomotum, and so much of what you, seems to me, from what you were doing in the early days, you really sort of you've advanced it and you're applying some of those lessons to this very day.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought that up. I had this experience more training in the early days than racing, but there's something that I heard a lot of people say over those years, and I said it on occasion, is, I didn't think I could do that. And those were really powerful words to me. And so since that time, I have wanted to spend my time either through scientific understanding or what we're doing now to bring other people that opportunity. And so we build, rehabilitative powered assistive devices, basically exoskeletons, you can call them, or wearable robotic devices, primarily for children with cerebral palsy who have difficulty walking. But the goal is exactly the same, right? It's to be able to give them an opportunity to have experiences where they say, I didn't think I could do that. And then you just watch what happens after that, right? You just get out of the way and let them do amazing things in life. And I am so grateful to have that opportunity, to be able to, be working on things like that. But it really did stem from that early, the power of that realization that really what most of us were in search of was for that moment where what became possible looked different. And when it looks different, life changes, right? You just start to do things in a different way. And, I think since 96, that has in a lot of ways been, and I've done so many different things, television and all kinds of other stuff that hopefully stays buried. But it was really in the pursuit of sharing with or helping understand how other people can have that moment, because it's how life changes. So that's what we're doing now. It's a former graduate student of mine and I. It has been equally as hard, if not harder, than doing long races. It requires a certain amount of resilience. You get told no a lot. It's challenging. You're trying to do something impactful. But here I am, 62 years old, doing my thing, trying to make something else work. And I feel a lot of gratitude for the whole journey. I just hope keep it going.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. Ray, we've taken so much of your time, and we're so grateful for that. And we love Ironman, and we're so immensely proud of Ironman New Zealand, the 40 years of it, and gosh, your contribution enormous in the early days, and people are going to be thrilled to hear you on the Old School Tri Show. At one point there, you sort of look back and question the relevance of how does it matter in terms of what I'm doing now and so on. Well, look, you're hugely relevant to us. You're hugely relevant to Ironman New Zealand, and we thank you so much for joining us on the Old School Tri Show.
My pleasure. Enjoyed it.